allowing ourselves to break, allowing ourselves to feel, allowing ourselves to be messy, allowing ourselves to be seen in our mess, allowing ourselves to fail, allowing ourselves to crack. This is the inner work. The work is in allowing ourselves to be exactly as we are. And in that allowing, you break open and you heal and you feel and you release and you transform and you alchemize and you step into your greatness. Yo, yo, what's up, everyone? Welcome to this beautiful episode of Stay Grounded with my dearest friend, Alex King. So you guys have been witnessing Alex come on the show more. He's been supporting with production for the show, and he's also somebody who I've known since he was 22, and I've watched him just grow into such a brilliantly grounded, solid young man. And what I loved about this episode is, him and I both dove into what is the inner work and why does it matter and how do we actually do the inner work. And as we started talking about this, the how is so interesting to me because now in hindsight, I can see how simple it is. Like pay attention to certain data points, unpack those data points using different varieties of tools and resources and people, and then learn specific skill sets so that you can rise above all of the trauma, all of the stuff that's stored inside of us so we can be free. But what was so beautiful about this episode is that Alex and I got to really hone in on a few very key principles around mirrors and what mirrors are and how do we lean into everyone around us as a mirror for growth. Alex shared vulnerably about his own processes, healing a deep set of triggers that came through his family and how that has shifted the way that he's moved through his life and the way he's experiencing family moving forward. One of the things I've just come so clearly upon or stumbled upon or landed upon really over the last several years is that I'm done with this whole world of mental health. I'm done with just managing symptoms. The inner work is about transformation. And when we lean into the principles of the inner work, you don't have to manage symptoms anymore. You can actually transform yourself into somebody who does actually just live a happier life. And that's what we talk about on this week's episode. How do you actually get there? What are the steps you take? And how you can integrate a life of awareness of the inner work into something that can really transform the way you experience everything in your life. So I hope you enjoy it. And I love you so much. Thank you for being here. And without further ado, here is a beautiful conversation with my dearest friend, Mr. Alex King. Enjoy. Alex.
Feeling very grounded.
That's great. We are in the beautiful mountains or not in the mountains, but I'm looking at the beautiful mountains of Boulder, Colorado, and feeling super inspired for this conversation. We've talked about a lot of things over the last several days, and I think one of the big common themes that came up, or the question that came up was, one, how do you do the work? I think that I talk a lot about the inner work. I talk a lot about, this journey of introspection and why it matters. But then there's like the tangible, like how do I actually do this work in a way that's sustainable, in a way that doesn't blow my entire budget, in a way that doesn't like take me on this wild, gnarly quest to find myself.
Eat, pray, love.
Right. Like, there's this romanticism of like the inner work and how people go on all these plant medicine ceremonies and they go out and about and they're just exploring themselves. And it seems like, and don't get me wrong, like I had that journey for myself. Right. And I recognized the privilege of it, and I recognized where I was at in my life and how much space I had to do that. But most people don't have that. And so, a big part of this conversation is really like, if you're busy, if you have a lot going on, how do you actually create the space, time, effort to do the work? And what's the most efficient and effective way to do that? And I think that exploration then brought us to the concept of mirrors.
Mm.
And that was a really beautiful conversation we were having. And so I'm curious, maybe we can start there.
Yeah. Well, first, before that, I'd love to talk about like the inner work word gets thrown around all the time. But what does that actually mean? Like, I think people think of inner work as like, okay, I go to work, and then that's my job. And then I have another job, which is my inner work. But what is that? What is that inner work to
I
you?
think the reason why it's called the inner work, or the why there's work attached to it, is because there's an element of discomfort
Mhm.
that's attached to the inner work, right? So, like, in order to go within, you have to be willing to face certain parts of you, which may feel like pushing a boulder uphill, especially if you've never done that before in your life, which may take up time and energy, and you got to hype yourself up. And, so there's all those pieces of the work. And so it feels like work. That's why I think it's called the inner work,
Mhm.
right? But ultimately, it is the journey of coming back to yourself, of coming into right relationship with self, and not and not moving through the world with a compass that isn't yours. And most people aren't even aware that they're on a journey that is uh, an unconscious journey, right? Like, it's like if you're a fish swimming inside of a dirty fishbowl, you have no idea you're swimming inside of a dirty fishbowl unless somebody pulls you out and you drop into a clean fishbowl, and now all of a sudden you're like, whoa, no idea I was swimming in all that stuff. And so that's kind of like, it's one of those, like, it does take work to go from dirty fishbowl to clean fishbowl,
Mhm.
and I can 100% say that it shifts the entire quality of your life. Like, you get to live with more meaning, more purpose, more connection. Your relationship shift. Like, I
Yeah.
and that to me is why mirrors are so important, because when I think of a mirror, right, like, I think of something like I believe this is from my one of my mentors, Panache Desai. Like, I remember the first things he told me years ago when I first got on my path was, we're walking around in a hall of mirrors. And I love that concept because when I think about how to do the inner work, most people start with, like, oh, I have this desire. I want to get into a great relationship, or I want to make this much money, or I want to get this healthy. Those are all amazing goals. And that is an entire world of work, personal development work, I would call that, right? But to truly wake up to your authenticity, to your most aligned self, which I believe is actually the thing that's going to create the best health results, that's actually going to create the most harmonious and fulfilling relationships, that's actually going to help you step into your creative pursuits and your work in the world that truly is in alignment. Like, it isn't actually about going and doing more of that. It's about paying attention.
Mhm.
That's where it is, right?
Yeah.
So it's not about adding more to your plate. It's actually about slowing down. And in that slowing down, now we can begin to reflect, look at, examine different things and different sensations and different feelings and different
Mm.
data points that are available to us in every moment that we normally might be running from, right? So I
Yeah.
think that concept of mirrors is so valuable when we talk about the inner work, because how do I know I'm growing? The
Yeah.
only way I actually know I'm growing is by looking at the mirrors in my life, right? Like, is my relationship to my work changing? If it's not, what am I doing? If that's why I started down this path of healing and growth and personal development, but I'm still not stepping into the into the layer of power that I want to be in, there's something to look at and there's data to examine. And so when I think of the inner work is actually taking an honest look at the data
Mhm.
and not fighting with the mirror of the results that you're getting. If you're still not in the relationship you desire, if you're still not experiencing the work you want, if your health still isn't where you want it to be, there's something else to be discovered. And that discovery process is the inner work. And the most honest form of the inner work begins by looking at your life through the lens of mirrors.
Yeah. And one thing that I'm curious about is, you say, okay, well, if your health isn't the way you want, if your job isn't the way you want, but when I think of mirrors and the inner work, I think of it's really about addressing the state of being that I'm operating in, period.
Mm,
Less so of the world around me and how it manifests itself, but more so like how do I feel day to day about what I'm doing, right? I think the misconception with maybe like things like The Secret or like manifestation is I'm going to dream about this yellow Ferrari and then it's going to show up one day and it's going to be there. But I think really what they're getting at is like the feeling of having whatever you want is already inside you. And that's like the inner work is like, okay, this feeling comes up in me. This trigger comes up in me. What do I do with that? And how do I sit with that and let it change, alchemize, and move?
Well, the what's interesting about what you're saying is there's brilliance in, like, if you think about building a house, right? Like you're upgrading your house, you're upgrading your internal house. It's like you're working on your house.
Mhm,
Do you want your house to be cluttered, noisy, dense, dark, like messy? Or do you want your internal house to be clear, clean, connected, vibrant, thriving? And so there is that piece of like ultimately what we want to feel. We don't actually want the yellow car, we want the feeling that the yellow car provides,
mhm,
right? And when we start to zoom out and be like, okay, like what's stopping me from feeling those feelings? That's the curiosity. Now the curiosity opens up the courage to go look at like, why can't I feel this way?
mm,
And that was me. Like, I mean, I achieved all the success. On paper, I was making all this money. And on paper, I had this great relationship. On paper, I was living in one of my dream cities, Austin at the time. Yet I felt not happy, not fulfilled, not connected. So it wasn't an external. There was an internal shift. There's a feeling that I couldn't access,
mhm,
and it was driving me nuts.
mhm,
And it was driving me to drink more. It was driving me to have health challenges. It was driving me to be out of integrity with me and out of connection with me. And so there is some beauty to what you're saying in that, like, I think a big part of this concept of the inner work is to the reason why we do this is so that we can feel better regardless of what our external circumstances are. Because once we recognize that the external isn't actually what we actually want to feel seen. That's what we actually, I'll even say this, like, we actually don't care to have the dream partner. The dream partner is just helping us feel a certain way, which is why we even want it.
right.
And so when we start to get clear on that, and then we start to ask, why don't I feel this way without a partner? That opens up the exploration. And what I've seen over and over and over again is when you solve that problem, why don't I feel this way without a partner? And you begin to feel that love and that connection and that abundance and that radiance and that connection to God, and you start to really embody it, the partner shows up
Mhm. Because you don't need it anymore.
because you
You're
don't need it.
living from a full cup.
Exactly. And so
Mhm,
to me, that is where there's a beautiful opportunity. And sometimes it takes those crisis moments to actually even begin the inner work, right?
mhm,
Like some people, like most people don't think about this until it's like, oh man, I've gotten out of this 9-year relationship and I'm realizing I'm so off. I want to shift. Breakups are such a powerful
mhm.
opportunity to grow. I found that for me over and over again. Like, I've had two significant uncouplings in the last several years, and both of them were profound opportunities for growth and expansion into more of myself. And yeah, and so there's that piece, and then there's also like the health crises, right? Like if it's health, like whether you're dealt with a cancer diagnosis or you've got an autoimmune condition that's now so debilitating that you can't actually move, you can't actually work, and it's forcing you to look. Now you start to pay attention,
Mhm.
and now you start to unravel, and you start to ask yourself those bigger questions. And it's interesting that these crisis moments happen in the ways that they do, right? And we all have a choice to either do the inner work or not.
Yeah. Go further into the unawareness, which
Further
you
in
see a lot of. I mean, that's the easier route,
in
right?
fact, that happened to me. My first real heartbreak was in college,
Mhm,
and I didn't have a mentor who could tell me like, "Hey, this is a profound opportunity for personal growth and development." But instead, I closed my heart, and I became just this serial dater, just kinda just really, disconnected from my heart.
yeah,
Like, I was very disconnected, and I spent 10 years being disconnected from my heart, and how I showed up in intimacy and relationship was very disconnected, and I didn't know why.
mhm,
I didn't know where that was coming from, but that's what you're saying, like, you have a choice in those moments to either break into personal responsibility, growth, healing, or into the other. And I really feel like every human being, if they had the right person to speak to them in those crisis moments, they would actually lean in.
Mhm.
We
I
just don't have that. We don't have that culture.
yeah.
That's not a culture that we've leaned into. We don't have a culture of leaning into crisis as initiation. We don't have a culture of leaning into hardship as opportunities to actually get the help you need. We don't have resources that are readily available for people without resource, which is ultimately why we have these podcasts, because like I want to share this stuff with those human beings in
Mhm.
those crisis moments. Because if you recognize that these crisis moments are actually absolute, fundamental to your development as a human being, and with the right tools, if you can actually compost and digest these experiences into a true alchemical transformational force that then results in you getting the thing you've always wanted. Whew,
Yeah.
what a gift.
But the societal norm is let's distract ourselves into oblivion. When things happen, when things are very hard, we're taught, okay, you run to this thing, you run to this thing, you run to this thing. And I think what's so cool about the work that you're doing and the work that we get to do with this podcast is um it kind of sheds light on, oh wait, there's a different way to do this. Have you seen that meme? It's really funny to me. I laugh at it every time because um it's these two people talking to each other and one of them's like, how did you become so self-aware? You're so like amazingly self-aware. And the person goes, thanks. It was the trauma. And it's like the pain that forces you to either grow or die in a certain way. It's very intense. And I think that's probably in my life what's been the biggest catalyst for growth is like these moments where I can't see the light anymore. I don't know what's going on, but I do know that I have a choice between I can either devolve and go down into this very um disconnected, dead state, or I can lean in into this unknown that I don't know where I'm going to pop out the other side, but I know that if I sit with it for long enough, then maybe I will pop out the other side. And that's really um, a lot of this mirror conversation is around the art of noticing that, even understanding that you have the choice to do that in the first place.
That's the first,
Mhm.
the awareness of that choice. I have a choice to look at this circumstance through the lens of growth instead of the lens of fear. And growth and love are both simultaneous. I get to look at this as through the lens of this is happening for me, to step into more of who I am, even though it might be impossible for me to believe that in the moment. And it's much easier to be a victim and to feed that victim story of, oh my God, this thing happened to me. And now it's just, I'm so broken. I can't get out of this. And if you feed that story, that's a choice. And I just want to offer that there's such a profound alternative. It's to do the inner work, and it's to actually compost these experiences into more. And these experiences don't have to be these micro big. Like I think of like, okay, you got the breakup, the big event happened. But then afterwards is when the work begins. It's like all the micro moments of insecurity, of fear, of denial, of anger, betrayal, all these wounds that get triggered of abandonment or rejection. That's now rich period where you can begin to unpack all the triggers that are showing up,
Mhm.
why they're showing up, and have tools and resources to do that, right? And so maybe that's where we can lean into next is, okay, when we think about mirrors and like how to do the work, like I think it begins with just paying attention to all the moments that you have a trigger. I remember when I first started down my journey, like I have a reflection process and a journaling process, which I now publish all my insights from on the podcast. But that process is very simple. I have an iPhone note in my phone, and I have a journal. And at the end of each day, like when let's say I'm going through my day and I get a trigger, I put the trigger inside my iPhone app.
I felt this thing about this
Yeah,
person.
it's like
Yeah.
this person, this thing. And then in my journal at the end of the day, I'll reflect. And then by the end of the week, I'll take a look at all my triggers and I'll try and digest the lessons. What was happening? Where did it come from? What's going on? How
What does that digestion look like? Like, is it a you're sitting there, you're meditating, you're letting whatever come in, or is it more intentional?
Yeah, so when I think about like digesting and what does that mean? Like to me, it comes down to activating your awareness. And I know that sounds weird, but like it's like the more it's like the same way like when you get more data, you learn more about yourself, right? So like I like to think of paying attention to these moments where you're really triggered, where you have fears, where you have wounds, where you have all this stuff. Those are like the moments to pay attention because that's all rich data. It's all rich data that is signifying what the trauma, like what you're like, because if you don't have the life you want right now, likely there's unconscious belief systems, there's unconscious traumas that are contributing to the suffering you're experiencing today. So if you just got out of a really difficult breakup and you feel abandoned and rejected and you feel betrayed or something happened, likely what's being triggered is a deeper core emotional wound from childhood that never fully got dealt with or expressed or processed. And therefore, the triggers you're experiencing right now are echoes of those experiences. And so when you start to actually pay attention, the goal of the inner work is to liberate yourself from the hold of past traumas, belief systems, and experiences, whether there were things that happened in your life or things that came before you. That's the ultimate goal. Is to just clear the system. Because once you clear the system, now you can show up with authenticity and create belief systems and dynamics and relationships and boundaries and agreements and principles that are more in alignment with who you really are. And so it's intentional lifestyle design, right? So that's what I mean by like on a daily basis. It's like just paying attention to all this stuff and having a coach or a community to work with. Like I had coaches when I was working with this stuff, like on a weekly basis, I was working with a hypnotherapist where I would bring in my triggers into my hypnotherapy sessions. And she would then take me into a deep trance state to go back into my unconscious mind and find the different memories and stored repressed traumas and things that were contributing to this trigger. In fact, a lot of the work that I did on my own piecemeal then became foundations for the stuff that we are building at Liberate.
Mhm.
The processes we create at Liberate to get, to like it took me 8 sessions with a hypnotherapist to accomplish what we do now in 90 minutes inside of a mapping session. So, a lot of the stuff so this process of going within is something we've simplified at Liberate, but ultimately it is just that process of paying attention and having a community to talk about this stuff with and a coach who's trained in trauma or a coach or somebody who's trained or maybe even starting to open up books and exercises. Like there were so many books I was reading at the time. Gosh, I'd have to go back and find those books. Maybe I'll list those books out. But ultimately, paying attention to triggers, paying attention to all that stuff, and starting to look for trends and themes. And then once you have trends and themes, working with somebody or going through some type of a program like Liberate offers to then like unpack, digest, see clearly, and work through some of those limiting beliefs, some of those repressed emotions, some of those. And ultimately, I think the big journey of the inner work is shifting your relationship to the things that happened to you,
Mm.
shifting your relationship to traumas that may have happened, shifting your relationship to the people that may have hurt you, shifting your relationship to the parts that you self condemn or judge or are not proud of.
Yeah.
Accessing more self compassion, more forgiveness. These are the relational qualities within yourself that I think is a big part of the inner work.
Yeah, and I think, what's cool about this is you know, when people say the word trauma, what comes to mind is, like, these gigantic events that happen in your life that are, like, major milestones or shifting points, but for me, like, so much of the inner work is, like, I got really angry in traffic, then I got really angry in the line at the grocery store. That like, why is that happening to me? Why am I feeling these, like, tiny little, seeds of anger or envy or jealousy? And sitting with those and be like, "Huh, what's going on there?" You know? And I think that's a big part of it too is, yes, there are these massive, um, huge things that happen to us, like you were saying earlier. But so often, I mean, this happens to everyone every single day.
I just want to name so the way that trauma binds in the nervous system. Let's just speak to that for a second. When you are a child, let's say you had something happen. It could be a big T trauma, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or it could be a little T trauma, like mom not giving you attention because she's on the phone. and you feel neglected. You feel like your needs don't matter. To a child that does not have a prefrontal cortex developed yet, which is the part of the brain that is rational, logical, and, in many ways conscious, the child, because ultimately the child relies on the caregiver for safety and survival, he or she will create a set of beliefs or understandings about the world that is all impacted by the event that happened. Mom did not have time for my needs. I must not be important unless I scream and throw a ruckus. Unless I get angry, mom doesn't give me attention. Unless I be big and loud, I won't get attention.
Mhm.
That then gets imprinted in the child's mind, psychology, psyche, nervous system. And it then influences the way that that child lives his or her life until she or he becomes an adult.
Yep.
And now all of a sudden, it's playing out in your intimate relationships. It's playing out in your work relationships. And because it hasn't been addressed or dealt with, and you haven't been able to get your needs met, it then adds stress to your body, which then may manifest as sickness,
Mhm.
which then may manifest as behaviors of you lashing out or overworking or whatever behavior we want to tie to some of these belief systems. So it's so important what you're saying because it's not just the big T trauma that then creates the need to do the inner work. If you are experiencing any level of disharmony, there's an opportunity for you to become more aware of where your patterns come from. And as a result of getting aware of your patterns and being equipped with processes and tools to work through the roots of those patterns, which are traumas, which are perspectives, which are belief systems, which are emotions, and slowly but surely begin to undress, unpack, you can shift and transform the way you experience your life. And transformation is the game. I'm done with this whole like symptom management game.
Mhm.
I feel like mental health is so focused on symptom management. How do we reduce anxiety? How do we reduce depression? Those are important markers because we don't really have better markers right now. But I'm more curious about because I don't actually feel like I actually believe in the wisdom of depression and anxiety. These symptoms are showing up to show us something. They are mirrors. These symptoms are mirrors. They're not meant to be suppressed, managed, moved, and shifted. They're meant to be understood and unpacked. And so then, what is the metric of true growth? It is shifting my relationship to anxiety and depression. It's shifting the relationship I have to what happened to me in my past. It's shifting the relationship I have to myself and all the parts of me that I might not be in love with. That to me is the goal of the work is to transform our relationship to everything that we become aware of.
Mm.
That is the ultimate end destination, and that transformation lasts. Like
Yeah.
it's different than just handling your health. Like it's true. Like there's so much possibility in the world of psychological development and
Mm.
when we lean into the inner work as opposed to taking care of my mental health.
Yeah.
It's a very
Yeah.
different game and a very different conversation, and one that has far, far more lasting benefits
Yeah.
than the former.
And I think something that we miss the mark on a lot in the general conversation about this is that when we become adults, right? We stop growing physically, but I think some of these I want to say like attributes or feelings that we commonly carry with ourselves, they kind of become embedded in our personality or in our sense of self. So, for instance, like I'm an angry person. I'm a impatient person. I'm a cold person without realizing that that's not actually who we are. Like I see so many people walking through life with like, well, that's just the way I am. Like I'm just an asshole. Like that's just me. But there was a point before you were that. Even if you can't remember that, you know? And so like it's what we were talking about earlier with the clouds are so thick that you can't you can't see the sky that's there. And maybe a good example just to like ground this into what we're talking about here is like around my family when I was growing up, like my heart just shut off because of certain things that had happened. And so for like 10 years, I was just shut off. Every time I was around family, I would be very cold. I couldn't feel those things. And after a while, it just became like, this is who I am
Mhm.
around family. And it was the common joke of like, oh, Alex is like the grandpa. Like he's like over there kind of cold by himself, whatever. But like I didn't want to be that way. But it became so habitual to me that it just kind of I just kind of accepted that that's okay, that's who I am. And it wasn't until I started like doing some of this inner work and realizing like, why am I that way? Like what's going on in there? And sitting with that and really like opening my heart back up where it's now at a point where I'm not like that at all around my family. Like I'm super loving and super open with that. But that's
Yeah.
like that's the work is me realizing like, wait a second, this isn't actually who I am. This is like a, adaptive state that helped me get through a certain period of life that is no longer productive or adaptive or positive. And so it gets to
Beautiful.
shed, it gets to leave now.
Beautiful, and I love that you use the word adaptive because, again, we create these adaptive survival patterns, behaviors, and mechanisms as a result of what we perceived we needed as a child to be safe. But those children are still lodged in the unconscious mind, which runs what 95+% of our operating potential. And so you think you are free of these patterns and these behaviors, and you think you're above them, but no, they're running the show until we look at them. But when we actually begin to shift the relationship with those children within us, we don't lose those parts. We don't lose the inner child. In fact, the inner child, the more I find myself doing my inner work, the more I feel my inner child coming online.
Yeah,
The
it
more
wakes up again.
expressed he is, the more into I see his gifts, his intuition, his marvel, his awe, his wonder, his passion, all the authenticity. My most authentic self is my inner child, right? And so it's like it's not about repressing the child and condemning the child. It's about learning to reparent the child, to show him or her a new way, to show the child that he or she can trust you, to hold a safe space for him or her to shine in the world. And that is the game of the inner work. It is to repair that relationship with ourselves and to give ourselves the needs, the love, the things that we may or may not have gotten from our caregivers who all did the best they could.
Mhm.
They showed up with everything in them, whether it was amazing or not. And getting to that state of forgiveness and love for them is also a big part of the inner work. And that's part of what I even see in you and what you're sharing is getting to that whatever experience is closed off your heart, getting to that state of like, oh my gosh, no, like my heart's open. I love you. I forgive you. I see you. And I want to have a better relationship with you. That
Mhm.
to me is the work that matters most. Like I've felt this since the day one, like helping people heal their relationships with their families is going to make this world the most beautiful place on the planet.
It's the most important work that
It's
you can do.
the most important work that we can do is to heal our relationship with our families. Period. It's the most potent mirror that exists. And it's sometimes a mirror that most people don't have access to because of an unwillingness of a family member or because a family member's gone.
Or because they don't have the resources, they don't have the tools in front of them to be able to do this or even know that it's possible to
Know
do
that
this
it's
kind of work.
possible is important.
Mhm.
Knowing that it's possible is important because I don't, and this is why I really feel strongly about. I remember one of the first, my former partner, Gina. Her and her family used to do the work together. I remember it being one of the most inspiring things on the planet. I remember being at one of her sister's journeys, and her father would be there, and they would all be there working on this stuff together. And I was like, wow, like that is 50,000% more effective than therapy.
Mm.
Me going
Mhm.
to a therapist to talk about my mother father issues instead of actually having safe environments for families to talk to one another. And you can only get there, one, by getting there yourself, right? Like, even with my family, like, for years, I wanted them to come into my world and do the inner work with me, come to journey spaces with me. And I kept being met with resistance. And it wasn't until I shifted my relationship with myself and I got through my own triggers, my own insecurities, my own need for them to be different, my own, all the attachments I had to what they needed to be.
Mm.
Then, as I showed up, transformed, they started getting curious.
Yeah.
They started leaning in.
Yeah.
They started coming to the table, and I started leading. And that's what I invite for everyone listening. If you don't have a family that's willing to do the work with you, focus on yourself. Be the transformation. Be the eye of the hurricane when you go home. That's the mark of transformation and power. Like if you go back home and they tried to pull the same shit they've pulled every Thanksgiving by they know what to say to you to just twist, 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 and you're just steady. That's gonna be like, they're gonna be like, who is this
Yeah.
person?
What's going on?
And that's the invitation. That's the crack.
Mhm.
And that to me is a beautiful North Star and a beautiful why for this work. Because if you can get there, I mean, the words of the late Ram Dass, like, you know, if you want to be enlightened, go spend a weekend with your parents. Or if you want to know how enlightened you are, go spend a weekend with your parents.
Yeah.
And that is to me like the biggest opportunity for growth
Mhm.
and the biggest gift we can give our parents in many ways. Like I really feel like, yeah, it's at least with my family. I don't know if I know everyone's got a different family dynamic, but with mine, like it's been beautiful to get to a point where I just love them and I appreciate them for who they are and knowing how much they've done for me and how the sacrifices they made
Yeah.
and to move through the pettiness that I was holding on to and all the deep, like just the core wounds and to really show my inner child a different light and to really again heal the relationship with my inner child with me
Mm.
because once I healed that, then it gave me the space to then just show up with
Yeah.
my family because I didn't need them to be my inner child's parent.
Mhm.
I am my inner child's parent. Now they can just be my friends, the people that I love and appreciate so much for raising me at the best way they could.
Totally. This is I don't know if, I just feel like I should probably I feel like I wanna share this with people. It's like I've been through this process exactly what you're talking about, you know, and I had no clue that this was possible, that it was possible to feel the way that I feel now.
Mm,
And it was as a result of, like, realizing that I had some serious things that I had never dealt with in my life as a child, that I never felt, that I never whatever, and being with people who were not only encouraging of unpacking that, but, like, supportive and, willing to do that, it was life-changing for me. I
mm,
couldn't remember things from my childhood. I had
mm.
blocked off that, like, so completely before the age of 12. Like, I could not remember what, like, Christmas was like or, like, family dinners. I didn't know any of it because there was so much pain associated with this one point in my life. And, it was manifesting in my life at the age of 22, like 10 years later, with a really maladaptive response around family. And, like, I couldn't be in the same room without just feeling, like, super angry or rage, and I'm like, "This is unjustified, like, I don't know what's going on. I
Totally.
have no clue why I'm triggered in the way that I am." And it was only when, somebody in my family actually encouraged me, like, "Hey, I think you've got some stuff that, like, maybe is still in there that hasn't been dealt with." And, of course, I'm like, "No, I'm good, like, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good." And it was through unpacking and sitting with that work and doing there was one person in particular who took me through this exercise of reparenting that kid inside me, and that was a really impactful and also hard exercise to go through of realizing, "Oh my gosh, I didn't feel loved, I didn't feel worthy, I didn't feel supported, I didn't feel all these things."
Mm,
But now as an adult, I'm able to go back to that kid and say, "You are loved. You are worthy. You are all of these things," and really heal that relationship there. And once that healed, like, dude, everything in my life changed. Everything. And my relationship with my family changed. I was able to show up from a place of unattachment and just love. And of course, like, I'm not perfect at that. Everyone like, I slip up a lot, but, like, I don't have that underlying charge of dysfunction in
totally.
the system, and it's completely changed my life, and
And this is the piece that's so beautiful. This is the piece that's so beautiful. You leaned into the mirror. The mirror was this family member. And instead of running from the mirror and saying, you're full of shit. This is you trying to change me again. This is you trying to project you're not looking at your stuff, all the scripts that are showing up. Instead of you doing that, you chose to sit with the curiosity of what if there is something still here. And the truth of it was that there was. You can't argue with the mirror. The ego wants to. The ego wants to run from it because, to be honest, the ego probably loves being in that dissonance.
Yeah,
The ego loves it because
100%.
it's safe, it's comfortable, it's
Yeah, it's what you
predictable,
know.
it's what you know. And so it's going to fight anything that's even remotely simulating, suggesting transformation.
Mhm.
So the courage that you practice in that moment, I want to call that out because I think that literally is the seed. It's the heaviest door. Like one of my favorite quotes is one of my mentors mentioned this to me, or a trainer I had years ago. And I say this all the time in the Liberate community. So if somebody from the community is listening to this, you're going to hear it another time. But it's like the heaviest weight you'll ever lift in the gym is actually the front door.
Mm.
You pausing in that moment and not projecting, but actually being like, what if? And putting your ego aside, even though it's probably screaming,
Don't do this, don't do
don't
this,
do this,
don't do
don't
this.
do this. Or like, this is so stupid. I don't know why. You put it aside and you leaned in. And that led to the greatest transformational experience you've had, shifted the relationship with your family, and has now allowed you to step into a whole new version of love that is more
Yeah.
authentically who you are.
Yeah.
And this is the thing I want to bring so much awareness to. Those moments where the mirrors are literally shining on your deepest pains are the moments to get curious. They're not the moments to numb, to run, to shift. Those are the moments to get curious and lean into the work. And that I just have to say that because that to me is the entire premise of this podcast. This specific episode is to inspire more of that,
Mm.
more leaning into the mirror.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that because it's so important to share these tangible examples.
Mhm. And I know we have to wrap up, but one final thing is that when that conversation was approached to me, um, I did not feel equipped to handle what was coming because I was so far away. Like, it had been 10 years since I had felt anything really deeply in my heart, you know? And so I was like, all right, I don't know what this is. I don't know what it's like. I don't even think there's anything here. But I remember praying and I remember saying, okay, God, if there is something here, like, show me and hold my hand because I'm going to really need it. And dude, as soon as I prayed that prayer, I felt this door in my mind that imagine your mind is like a house, right?
Mm,
There's all these windows, there's light coming in, it's like breezy and flowy. And there was this one door in the attic that was chained off, do not enter, don't go in here. And I remember, like, in my mind, cracking that door. And I just felt this massive wall of water behind the door. And dude, as soon as I cracked it, it just flew open and all this water started to spill out. And what that looked like for me was like there was months where I would cry every day and I had no clue why. I just felt so much. I felt so much, everything. And in those moments, like those are the times where you get to choose to lean in or lean out. And I'm like, all right, I'm on this process. I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know what it looks like at the end of this tunnel. I had to have so many conversations. I had to write letters. I had to have just so many things happen. And as I would do these things, as I would feel that water like flow out of that room, I felt lighter and lighter and
yeah.
lighter. And I felt that inner child wake up and I felt my heart wake
Yeah.
up. And it was
Yeah.
just like completely transformational.
Yeah. No, man, I'm so grateful you're sharing this because I think sometimes when I think about my own journey, like I'm like really, you're like bringing me back to so much awareness around some of my earliest processes and like how I'm so glad you're speaking to like the months of being in that period of feeling,
And realizing
especially if
it's
you,
okay to break.
so, and it's self-compassion.
Mhm.
Ultimately, that's what that is. right? Coming back to why we do the work is, and all these experiences of allowing ourselves to break, allowing ourselves to feel, allowing ourselves to be messy, allowing ourselves to be seen in our mess, allowing ourselves to fail, allowing ourselves to crack. This is the inner work. The work is in allowing ourselves to be exactly as we are. And in that allowing, you break open and you heal and you feel and you release and you transform and you alchemize and you step into your greatness. And that greatness is free. That greatness is liberated. That greatness is the authentic, aligned, expressed, loving, present, beautiful human being that has always been within you, but it was hidden underneath mountains of unconscious pain and trauma that
And
has no
armor.
place being in your body. It served a purpose. It served a purpose to not feel, to keep you safe in those moments. And now you get to choose if you want to carry this stuff with you moving forward. And I can speak from my own experience, letting go of all the things that were lodged away in my mind, in my body, and learning how to alchemize and process and release, and having communities to hold me while I was messy has been so life-giving. It's truly been like the journey of unraveling self has been the greatest purpose of my life. There will be many things I do, but true purpose is in my eyes and my felt experience come through these experiences of unraveling. When we get to experience who we really are in those moments. And I'm just so grateful for you, Alex. Like, I'm proud of you actually for leaning in and for doing the work. And that's why you're here. That's why you're
Yeah, and we
supporting.
met at the beginning of that process
Oh
for
yeah,
me.
I knew who you were at 22. I met you, and I knew from the moment I met you that you were leaning in. And just I'm so proud of how far you've come. I really am. Like, you've become. I actually texted your mom this too. I was like, I'm just so proud of like the solid, grounded, uh, connected, brave soul that you've learned to access within yourself, and the man that you're becoming as a result of being so aligned with that and the choices you're making. And I'm proud of you. So
Thank you.
yeah. You're doing great, man. You're doing great. And everyone listening, this is what it is. This is the work. It's messy, and if you don't have resources, or if you're kind of trying to navigate how to do this inner work, head to liberate.health. I mean, I'd really be remiss not to share, like, this is why we built the company. We built it to create affordable tools and resources for you to begin this inner work journey, to unpack these triggers, to have community support you, to ask questions, to be in safe settings, to really practice this journey of becoming more of yourself and accessing more of yourself. And so, our emotional mapping sessions and our emotional lab reports are fantastic first starts to sort of get into the liberate process. And then from there, we have people that'll just guide you deeper into the work. And so, yeah, again, Alex, thanks so much for being here, man, and for pouring so much into this conversation in the way that you have. I'm super grateful for the beauty that was added,
Yeah.
especially towards the end.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
It was a really good conversation.
Yeah. Everybody, that's a wrap for this week's episode of Stay Grounded. Your host, Raj. This is your friend, Alex. And from us, stay grounded. We'll chat soon.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Stay Grounded. No matter where you're from or what you're going through, I hope it helps you remember just how incredible you are and have always been. If you're on a path of emotional healing or self-discovery and would like to learn how Liberate can support your journey, head to www.rajjana.com/liberate. That is LIBER8 to learn more about our current group programs and one-on-one offerings. I love you guys, and I'll see you next week.